welcome to another special edition Barmy Army podcast. Today we are joined by Rich Laverty. Rich, thank you for joining us. You're with me and Natalie. We'll come to you in a moment. Rich, very quickly. Nat, how are you doing?
Good. Can't wait for this one.
You're looking forward to this one. Rich, how are you doing?
I'm very good, thanks.
Good. Thank you for joining us. Could you, rather than me give you some sort of description that may not do you justice, could you tell us who you are, what you are, and why you may have had dealings with some of us in the past, especially now?
Yeah, so obviously I'm a women's football writer. I've been involved in women's football for nearly 10 years on and off, but really sort of full time for the last 5-6 years, covering the WSL, the Championship, or WSL2 as it was when I got into it. European Championships, World Cups. It's been quite a journey in a very short space of time, and yeah, as a lot of people know now, and obviously Nat knows, and many people know, I've been working with Sheffield United the last 2 years, doing the media on the women's side and the social media. So that's been great as well, to sort of get a look at the other side of it, and to work in PR and to work with a team. And I think working with a team was probably something I didn't really appreciate before, what it's like to actually work with a great group of players, and I've actually really enjoyed it. I didn't know what it was going to be like getting into it. I've always been a writer and I've always enjoyed writing, and I still do, but it's actually been a really nice balance the last 2 years. So yeah, and hopefully many more years to come.
Okay, thank you for that. Nat and I, we've got some questions of our own, and we've also asked some of our members to come up with questions, so we're going to fire these at you, and let's go from there. Nat, do you want to kick off thinking about?
Well, did you want to ask a member's question?
Okay. One of our members just wanted to know, Rich, what advice would you give to somebody who was looking to get into sports journalism?
I mean, I went down the very conventional sort of boring route and went to university, did a sports journalism degree, did lots of work experience at local newspapers, and I don't know, it's really difficult to give sort of set advice because everyone has a different journey. Some people get very lucky. You know, I came out of university and got instantly kind of involved with the Offside Rule podcast, and I was working with, 3 fantastic female broadcasters who had a lot of contacts, and naturally off the back of that, we started doing a lot of women's football. It was around the time Manchester City were coming in, so I went to cover Manchester City a lot, and it really just flowed from there for me, But what I'd say is, write to people, write to editors, put pictures to people, make sure they're unique and they offer something that other people can't do, and make contacts, make contacts with people. And, I look back now and think probably the early days when I got involved, back sort of covering Leeds United's women's team when I was at university, which is nearly 10 years ago, some of the people I met there, I kept in touch with. Some people I didn't, because I didn't really think I was going to stay in women's football. I didn't think there was a career in women's football. And, I've said before, and obviously relevant to this podcast, the first player I ever met in women's football was Leah Galton, who obviously now plays for Man United. And she was at Leeds at the time. She was about 17, and I didn't really keep in touch with Leah. She went off to America about a year later. And, I always think now, what if I had kept in touch? Obviously she's playing for Man United now. So, but there are people from that team that I did keep in touch with that are still in women's football, and you just never, ever know, for me in journalism, when a contact's going to come in handy. So that's been the biggest thing for me, like whether it's interviews, whether it's stories, whether it's transfers, you're not going to get anywhere unless you've got people that trust you with information.
Thanks very much, Rich.
Just building on from that and into our questions, Rich. You said you started off a lot Offside Rule. That's a really good podcast. But, what was women's football like? I mean, you said you started when it was WSL2 and City were coming in, Leeds United, that, City are still there, a big powerhouse. But what was it like, say, if we're talking Man United fans coming in when we did, did you feel like Man United were needed, or was there any ever talk like that? But what was it like generally just before United, when it was WSL2, when it was?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was always. Yeah, it was always mentioned. Like Man United were always a talking point anytime the licenses came up, and I think in 2014 was when Man City came in, and I think Man United just viewed it as not being the right time I think there was always a feeling they were going to do it one day. And I remember when 2018 came around thinking if they didn't do it then, they'd just never do it. And obviously they did. But before, I mean, I don't think the sport itself has changed a massive amount. It's growing, of course, and attendances are growing and interest is growing and money's growing. But, you know, the sport itself was the same. You know, it's the same product. There was 22 players on the pitch. There were some fantastic players, you know. Even the ones now, you know, the big names, the Steph Hortons, the Ellen Whites, you know, the Jordan, they were all around in 2011 when it started. They were certainly all around in 2014. Lucy Bronze, another one. And like I said there, you know, even your Leah Galtons, who were around 10 years ago, just at a different level. And, you know, they still feel like some of the younger players. So it wasn't massively different. I really enjoyed WSL2, actually. It probably didn't get the attention it does now, with obviously Liverpool and Leicester City and Sheffield United and obviously Man United and Tottenham last year. But I really enjoyed it. You know, I covered Sheffield FC a lot when they were in it, and that was such a cosy little place to go. And I think you guys, like in away trips, would have really liked Sheffield FC. And obviously that's where I met Carla Ward, who played a big role in me going to Sheffield United. And yeah, you know, Doncaster Rovers Bells, you know, I always used to love going there. It was a nice league, you know, a lot of teams have gone, unfortunately. Oxford and Yeovil and Watford, you know, it's unrecognisable now to how it was back then. But I don't think there was ever a sense that big teams were needed. I think the traditional fans, you know, just enjoyed it for what it was. It was a day out. You went, you saw your mates, you got to watch a bit of football, and then you went home again. And obviously now I think Man United coming in just is, it shows how it's growing more than the fact that they were needed to grow. I think the fact that they wanted to get involved shows that women's football was starting to grow. And obviously teams like Tottenham and West Ham and Brighton, and even, you know, like I said, Sheffield United and Leicester as well, that have really started to take it seriously. So yeah, it was nice. It's changed, it's growing, but I don't think on the face of it, it's changed as a sport too much. I think it's probably behind the scenes, it's changing more than anything.
I know you talked a little bit about United obviously coming in. When there wasn't a United team, what was the sense like within the game? Was it acceptant? Was it critical?
I think it varied. I think you had some fans that thought it was disrespectful that Man United didn't have a women's team, and I think a lot of people felt that way. But like I said, your traditional fans, they weren't really bothered. You know, they went out, they watched their game. It didn't matter who they were playing, you know, whether it was Arsenal or whether it was Oxford United, you know, they just enjoyed going to watch it. And I think there were some people who almost didn't want the bigger teams to come in because it showed that it was going away from that a little bit. It was going away from what so many fans were used to. But I think it was inevitable. I think once that license reopened again, that United and Tottenham and everyone else, they were going to come into it. I think it was the right time for it. But no, it was very mixed. There were some people who weren't bothered. There was a lot of, I think it was more criticism of the club as a whole, that, and it was the same with Real Madrid for a long time, that these big teams didn't have women's teams, and obviously now they both do, or Real Madrid will in about, I think, 8 days' time when they actually take over TACON.
And obviously, you mentioned a bit before about when it was announced, 18 came around, and obviously, I'll speak. I don't want to speak out of turn for everyone, but me and Deb, we were just, all right, you know. But what was the feeling when it was announced? When it was Casey, you know, what was everyone saying? What was the talk of the town then?
It's hard to remember. I think when it got announced, I might be wrong, I feel like it was quite late in the evening or something, but I don't know why. But I think we were all at a Manchester City Champions League game, ironically. I can't remember who they were playing, but I seem to remember it was an evening game and we were in the press room after the match, and there was some rumours that it was going to break that evening, that United were going to announce they were going for a licence. And I think it came out at like 10 o'clock at night or something, the official announcement, because I think I was on the train home. I remember getting tons of questions on social media about it, and it was exciting. You know, I think the realization that Man United were going to have a women's team, I don't think we knew at the start what division they were going to go into, but straight away you think, well, you know what's their squad going to look like? You know, they need 20 odd players. They've got nobody at the minute. Who's the manager going to be? You know, I think that was the biggest thing, first and foremost, who was going to be the manager of this team. And I think it was. I think people think journalists are kind of robotic and we don't get excited about things. We do. United coming in was exciting. We all knew we'd work with them and we'd cover them and we'd get to know, the ins and outs and who was going to come into the squad and who the manager was going to be officially. So it was, from what I remember, it was quite exciting. I think, like I said, there were probably some fans that were less excited, and I think there were a lot of general women's football fans that were very excited. But it was, it was a good move. But I'm sure it came out when we were at Manchester City, which was quite ironic. I don't know if that was intentional or not to drop it off the back of a Manchester City match.
So once, obviously, it's announced United are going to field a team, then we announced Casey as the manager, and then we put the squad together. What were your thoughts once manager and players were announced?
Yeah, I think Casey was a really good choice. Obviously, she'd worked with Phil in the England job for a few months and got a little bit of experience. I mean, I think people forget as well, Casey actually was a player manager quite briefly many years ago at Chelsea. So she did have a little bit of experience, but I think someone coming in fresh, someone who knew the women's game, someone who knew all the current players because she'd only just retired, someone who had all the right coaching badges and the respect as well. I don't know whether it was part of it, but I think for Man United coming in, they got a little bit of a bad rep from some fans for just jumping in when they got the chance or, going into WSL2 or the Championship. And Casey is someone who's like really respected in the game. Everyone likes Casey Stoney. She was England captain. She's been a role model for so many people. And I think it was a perfect choice, really. In terms of the squad, I think it was kind of, I think, what people expected. I think some were surprised that the likes of, obviously, Alex and Siobhan dropped down from the WSL as England internationals at the time. But the rest of it, I think we all knew they were going to go about taking the United academy products, the likes of Kirsty Hansen, the likes of Katie Zellen that had been there as kids, and then the best young players. They took players that needed game time, players like Ella Toone and players like Millie Turner, that had been playing games or maybe not at the top level and just needed a solid base, really. So I think it was probably the best squad that I think realistically she could have put together, really, for the Championship.
I mean, there was some other rumours, but I don't even want to get into them, about who could have. But obviously, you just sort of touched on Alex and Siobhan. Were people surprised that Alex did that, or what was the feeling? Was it anger towards Alex? Was it, oh, she's going for the money? What do you think?
I don't think people were angry. I think people were definitely surprised because, it was 1 year away from a World Cup. And, Alex obviously is competing for a position where there's two very good left backs, obviously Demi Stokes at Manchester City. And I think a lot of people thought, wow, you're going into a part-time league, you're going to be playing against the likes of Lewis and London Bees and, Millwall and even, us at Sheffield United coming in fresh thinking, like, how much are you going to be tested in that league? I think there was a realism that United were going to win a lot of games by 5, 6, 7 goals as they did. And I think it was a lot of how prepared is Alex going to be, going from that to playing against obviously the US and France and Germany and teams like that. So I think it was a bold move by Alex. I really do. And part of me respects her for doing it, that she took that risk and it worked out. She went to the World Cup and obviously, more surprisingly, she got a move to the best club in Europe off the back of it. So it was, I think people were surprised. I don't think people were angry. I think, when you get offered the chance to be the captain of the first ever Manchester United team, I think, that's an opportunity a lot of people would not turn down. I think it was surprise. I was surprised a little bit, but I don't think there was any anger. Certainly not that I remember anyway, but I don't remember seeing any.
I'm just going to jump ahead a couple of questions because you talked about at the time of the announcement you weren't sure obviously what level United were coming in at. Do you think going in at Championship level was right? Because it felt like from a lot of the social media, United couldn't do right for doing wrong in that situation because yes, we were winning games easily, and that was a criticism. But had we taken another team's Super League place, that would have caused. what was your thinking about where we should have gone, and what was our level at that point?
Yeah, I think when you have a licensed league, you're right, you can't do right for doing wrong, because at the end of the day, it's not the club's fault. At the end of the day, the rules are in place. It's always been a licensed league, and essentially the clubs can do what they want. If they want to apply for WSL, they can apply for WSL. If they want to apply for the second tier or third tier, they can do that. My issue, and I had this argument with some United fans the other week, including Nat, about where United were. I didn't have a problem with United doing that. I think the young players they had and the players that needed game time, it was good for them. And again, I think of players like Leah Galton, who'd had a little break from the game, and Kirsty Hansen and Ella Toon, who just left Man City and had only played a couple of senior games. For players like that, it was great. And my problem with it was we had this whole announcement over the restructure, and that WSL was going to be a full-time league, the championship was going to be a part-time league, and you thought, well, okay, that works, and then the teams can decide, if you want to be full-time, you apply for WSL. If you want to be part-time, you apply for the championship. And then suddenly United were allowed to go in the championship full-time, and you thought, well, it's not really fair, that they're going to win, 5-6, 7-0 most weeks. You've said it's a part-time league, so why are you letting a full-time team in? I think that was the issue. I've no problem with teams investing. We want to see more teams investing, and obviously Aston Villa did it this season, and there's other clubs looking at doing the same this season, and it's great for the game. But I think we just needed that clarity for the FA to come out and say, well, okay, it's a part-time league, but if you want to go full-time, you can go full-time. And then we'd have all said, okay, well, that's fine. But they came out and said, it's a strictly part-time, semi-professional league. And then United waltzed in, full-time contracts and everything. So it was just a little bit, I think it put people's backs out a little bit to think, well, is it one rule for one and one rule for everyone else because it was Man United? And I don't think it was, but obviously that's the kind of conclusions people jump to, because unfortunately, there's a lot of history with the FA making these decisions in women's football where they say one thing and unfortunately something else happens, and you think, well, what's going on? So I think, certainly from my view, I think the frustration was more aimed at the FA for the lack of clarity rather than at Man United. I think Man United probably, I don't think there was a right or wrong, but it was obviously just right for Man United the way they wanted to recruit. And obviously if you come straight into WSL, recruiting 20 players for that level is a very different thing. And I think, like I said, in the championship, it offered them the chance to give young players an opportunity to play games.
Rich, you've sort of talked about, you've sort of hit a nail on the head with one question I had. Did you expect us to win it? And I think, like we said, coming in full time, I think we did. But for fans, myself, Deborah, a lot of the Barmy Army, when it all started, we didn't know full time from part time. We didn't know left from right. We didn't know anything about the women's game. We were just coming in to watch another Man United team. The boys, under 23s, under 18s play at Lee. So it was just, why not just make our way down there kind of thing. Obviously, Reading was a big match. 5,000 people were there. Villa, 12-0. So obviously you're thinking, oh, we might win. But I'm guessing your first interaction with the Barmy Army was that night, Sheffield, that very first home game. What did you think of the Barmy Army throughout the season, or just sort of when you first started hearing about, they've got this many fans, they're doing this, they're doing that? What look at them singing songs.
Yeah, I think to be honest, I probably realised how interested people were probably as soon as the announcement happened, because I can't remember which fans it was. I can't remember if it was you guys or other people or the same guys that I talk to now on social media, but I do remember like there being so many questions like during that period of time, about the questions about the league, questions about players, questions about staff, and people just wanting to know. And you don't often get that. Like a lot of fans are quite laid back. They like finding things out from the club. And like I've said, and I had this conversation with you, Nat, the other week about how people are kind of set in their ways and they have their traditions, whereas obviously you guys have come across from the men's game where obviously everything gets reported every day, whether it's true or false, no club in the men's game now announces anything before fans knowing about it in advance. And you guys kind of came in with that attitude of we want to know everything now, and that was quite different for the women's game. In terms of the fans, I don't know. I was at Liverpool. I remember writing. I went to the Liverpool away game in the Conti Cup. Obviously, a lot of people did. It was Man United's first match, and I remember writing after the game. I was quite disappointed. Like, I mean, we were very high up. Prenton Park's a big stadium, and there weren't actually many fans there. Like, there was quite a few away fans, but there weren't many home fans. I don't even think there was 1,000 people there. And I kind of wrote that I was quite disappointed. And then obviously the week after you played Reading, like you said, and there was 5,000 there. Unfortunately, I wasn't at that match, so I didn't experience it. With Sheffield United, it was weird because like I was there, but I was up in like the VIP bit, and it was absolutely launching it down with rain. So I was kind of sheltering inside. I think it was probably when we played you at home, actually, OLP, and obviously you all came down with the flags, and you know it was a freezing cold night in a stadium that didn't have a lot of shelter. It had no shelter, pretty much, OLP. So, and you were all down there like in your hundreds with the flags, and I think that was probably the point for me in terms of seeing you guys at games, where I thought, yeah, you know what, like if they're traveling to Sheffield on a Wednesday night for games that, like I said, you pretty much know you're going to win as well. Yeah, I kind of realised then how committed some of the fans were. Because again, you don't really see flags. You know, you don't hear the chanting. You don't see the flags draped at the side of the pitches in women's football. It's just such a rare thing. So when you actually start seeing it for the first time in 5-6 years, it does stand out.
It was a good night, that. I remember that one.
Yeah,
It wasn't that good. Not for us.
I enjoyed it.
What was it, about 25 seconds?
yeah.
It was something ridiculous, wasn't it? Yeah, it was Feb half term, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So I think there was some of the younger fans out there as well. But yeah, that's one we've often talked about in a list of our favourite games. So that's the Championship kind of talked about a bit. Coming into the Super League, obviously this last season, what did you think of the signings that we made?
Yeah, I think the initial ones were very solid. I always said I thought Hayley Ladd would be United's best signing, and I'm still adamant she was this season. I think she was the best of the bunch. I think Jackie, odd one. I probably expected a little bit more. I think it was a catch-22. I think United fans got a bit more excited than maybe they should, because obviously she was an international. She just played in a World Cup final, but I don't think she's ever been world class. I think she's a very good player, and I still think there is more to see that United fans haven't seen yet. But I'm not sure whether she's got that next level to go to. Abby McManus is a very solid player. You know, you'll get a 7 out of 10 from Abby every week without a bit like Jackie, that she won't probably get further than that. And then Jane's a strange one, because I quite liked the signing at the time because I'd watched her so often at Manchester City, and she'd been such a pivotal part of their title-winning team. She'd been their top scorer. You know, she was the ultimate poacher. If you got crosses into the box, you know, she was there. And City had Nikita Paris and Lucy Bronze and Tony Duggan and so much quality, but they played to her strengths. And I remember the first game against Man City, I know she missed that chance, but that was kind of what I was expecting. You know, Leah getting to the byline, getting the crosses in, and Jane being there. You know, her movement is very, very good. And a lot of games I've watched, it's kind of changed. You know, Leah is more sort of a bit more narrow. You know, she's scoring goals. You've got Lauren James who's linking up, and you don't really see that many crosses coming into the box. And I don't think United also have the fullbacks to do that. And I think Jane, again, she's a solid player. You know, she won't score 15, 20 goals. She won't be a Beth England or a Miedemar or a Sam Kerr, but I think there's more there again. So I think overall, on the face of it, the signings were very good. Obviously, Lotta and Mary came in kind of unexpected because of other reasons. But yeah, for a first summer, I think I don't think you could complain too much. I think it was always going to get you to a certain level, but you know, as I'm sure we're probably going to come on to, the hardest thing is, you know, you can get into the top 4 or 5 quite easily in the WSL, but getting into that top 3 now, that's where it's going to get pretty tough now for Man United, I think.
you see, Rich, you've said that, but I remember when we had the championship, we won it with ease, and there was this talk of, well, now you're going to see. Now you're going to see a different level. And I'm not saying that the top three aren't a different level, but you've just said getting into the top four is quite easy. And I think when we were saying we expect to finish fourth, there was other people out here saying, oh, eighth, oh, Liverpool are a good side, oh, Bristol might do this. And I think a lot of people, the fact that we didn't get rid of half our team and put half our team in, so you still got Millie there, you still got Tooney there, Katie Zellum's still there. You know, the spine's still the same, Jess is still there. Whereas Tottenham say they got rid of everyone and put everyone in. So people are like, oh, well, Tottenham's got players like Gemma Davidson, like this, like the other. Maybe people underestimated. I mean, did you see that? Did you expect United to finish fourth? Did you expect them to, this season that we've had, maybe, you know, say City and Arsenal, only 1-0 defeats?
Yeah, I thought they'd be up there. I think almost the way it happened was kind of the other way around to how I expected it. I did think United would have enough to sort of beat most of the teams below them. I mean, we'd seen it already last season. They beat West Ham in the Conti Cup. They beat Brighton in the FA Cup, and I think beat Reading in the Conti Cup as well. So that wasn't a surprise. I think it was the defeats against West Ham and the defeats against Bristol that surprised me more. I think against the top teams, I kind of thought they're not going to challenge them. They're not going to be quite there. But actually, you probably pushed the top teams more than I think a lot of people ever expected. You know, Man City on the opening day and Arsenal the week after, and even the games against Chelsea, you know, it was always sort of 1-0. And that was quite surprising. Like, I thought United would be a little further off. So the biggest thing in the WSL that you've got to do to get into that top three is you've got to be ruthless against everyone below. You look at that top three, how many points they drop against all the other teams. It's probably, you could probably count it on one hand over the course of the season. So that's the first thing. United can't afford the 3-2 to West Ham. They can't afford the 1-0 to Bristol if they want to have a chance, because you're going to have to beat the top three. You're going to have to beat at least one of them. And to do that, you have to take all the points against the teams below you, because that top three will, Man City, Chelsea, Arsenal, they are ruthless when it comes to, you know, there'll be the odd one result, but it will generally be one result. And that's where United, that's the first thing they have to do. They have to make sure they're beating the West Hams, beating the Bristols, and then they have to find that extra quality, you know, especially in front of goal, because that is what let them down in the big games this season. They didn't score goals. They didn't score against Arsenal. They didn't score in the league game against Man City. They didn't score at Chelsea. And that's where it's got to change, because if United want to get top three, you're going to have to be beating those teams at least a couple of times a season.
So what would, bearing that in mind, what would you say are, and I know obviously there's still signings to be made, maybe departures still to happen. What would you think are our realistic goals for next season and our aims? Where should we be aiming for? Because obviously now we've hit fourth. Are we ready yet to make that push?
I think we'll know a lot more, obviously, come September when the window shuts. And I think every year now going forward, it's going to be big transfer windows for United, because everything's happening so quickly. You've gone from building a team to win the championship to building a team to get into the Champions League. And the difference is absolutely massive, you know, between playing your London Bees, like I said, your Lewis's, your Sheffield Uniteds, to go in and play in, you know, and wanted to compete with the Lyons and the PSGs and obviously the other English clubs that are in Europe. So I think there's work to be done, definitely. I think there's not as much overall quality in the team. I think there's some very, very good players. But I look at Chelsea, for example, and you look at Ericsson and Bright as a centre-back duo. You look at Mielda, you look at G, you look at Sam Kerr and Beth England, and you just think, you know, they're world-class in every position. And Arsenal had a difficult season, but there's still so much quality, you know, big international players. And like when you've got Miedemar up top, you're always going to score goals. Man City a little bit less so, but they're so consistent as a team. You know, such a big part of that team has been together for the last 5-6 years, which makes them so hard to beat. And I just look at United and I think they either need that consistency or they need the big players. And obviously Nat's talked about big players in the past, but it's a catch-22, because to get the big players, you're probably going to have to be in the Champions League. But you might have to get to the Champions League first to attract those big players. So you have to combine it. Casey has to work some magic and find some gems, or she's got to get the very, very best out of the players that are there to jump into that top three, because they've all been there a long time, and I think it's going to be hard. I wouldn't be surprised if United came fourth again, because that's not a criticism, but I just think that top three have been there for so long and they're so good that you might close up. And I think if United came fourth and they were sort of 1 or 2 points off, you'd say, well, do you know what? They've progressed. Now they need really take that next step. And I think obviously they'd look to maybe win a cup or something like that. But I wouldn't take top three as an absolute given, just because of how good the top three are and the players that they've got. But we'll see what happens in the transfer window, because it's been open 4 days or something, and there's like 3 months left. So I'm sure it's like the longest transfer window ever. It's crazy.
I'm going to go on to a controversial opinion. I hope no one minds, but for me, third is there. It's gettable. It's I wouldn't say it's easily attainable, but like you say, it's the games against the Reading, the Bristols, the West Hams. You know, Casey sort of said we should have been 10 points closer, which I agree. And it is those little games, and I think it's a mentality thing as well. And I'm not saying that they're not up for it. I think they're up for it, but I think when they play games against Chelsea and City, and we saw it in the Cup, when they went out there, I don't know if you saw the Conti Cup one, Rich, Man United.
Yeah, I didn't see the Conti Cup match. I saw the FA Cup match, but not the Conti Cup
even
one.
the FA Cup match, I think once Abby scored that goal, this is how we say it on this channel, she scored the goal, it went over the line, yeah? And it didn't go in, and I think it would happen with any team, but they lost their heads, and then City went up the other end and scored. And I see that when things don't go their way, or, you know, there's Conti Cup match versus Chelsea as well, and I saw Lauren running down one-on-one, even the Arsenal game. And I'm not trying to dig out players, because that's not what we do, but I think it's that belief that they need, because I saw in the Conti Cup they had that belief, and they scored first. Zellum scored that free kick, and then it was plain sailing. So I think even in the FA Cup, we scored that goal, we equalised. It was only going one way. Obviously, you know, we'll talk about rest later, but do you see that having an impact? You know, mentally. I mean, I know you talk about fullbacks. We'll get onto that, but do you see what I'm trying to say? You know, is it that a thing that she needs to work on, Casey?
I think mentality is. I don't think it's almost a negative for United. I just think it's something that Man City have so naturally. They've been doing it for 6 years. And obviously through that time, they had the same manager until very, very recently, who instilled that mentality, a very certain way of playing that you watch Manchester City and it's almost robotic. Like, it's not as exciting as watching Chelsea or Arsenal, because they don't have the big foreign superstars. Nick very much built it around British players. But they're so well drilled, that makes them so hard to beat. And I remember watching them again in 2016 when Jane was there, and they conceded 4 goals all season, and only one of them was from open play. The other 3 were penalties. And when you take into account that league had Arsenal, that league had Chelsea, a very good Liverpool team, a very good Birmingham team, like, that was an incredible achievement. And that mentality they have now of knowing they're hard to beat, you know, they're very rarely ever beaten. Like, especially, like I said, against the teams below the top 3 or 4, is, I think, what United have to gain. And you gain that through results at the end of the day. You know, United, they were in their first season in the WSL, so they couldn't have that mentality because they had nothing to compare it against. They'd never played Chelsea before. They'd never played Manchester City before. But I do think there is a need for more quality, and I think that is natural when you are progressing as quick as they are. And I look through the squad, and there's just not enough players for me that have played at the top level. I look at, you know, the defenders. Amy Turner, very solid, but, you know, she was at Liverpool when they were sort of 5th, 6th in the league. She was at Notts County when they were 5th, 6th in the league. She's never been at the very top. Same with Millie Turner, who was at Everton and Bristol City. You know, obviously Kirsty Hansen was with Doncaster Bells in the Championship. You know, that was her first season in WSL. Leah had obviously been out of the game for a little while. Lauren James is obviously still very, very young, obviously a brilliant player. Even Hayley Ladd, you know, an exceptional player, but, you know, had been at Bristol City, had been at Birmingham. And I just look at the other teams and you look at them and think, oh, they've played, you know, for these massive clubs and biggest teams in England and big international players. And sometimes you just need that extra bit of quality. And I know, obviously, Nat, you go on about strikers and obviously Jane, and you look at that top three again: Arsenal, Miedemar, you know, best in the world; Chelsea, Sam Kerr, best in the world; Man City, Ellen White, you know, again, one of the best anywhere, top scorer at the World Cup last year. And they just have these players that can do something out of nothing. When it's 0-0, when it's tight, they'll win the game, even if they play badly. And I look at United's squad, and I just don't see that player yet. And I think that's natural because they are so young, but that's where they have to get to. And it's difficult because, again, to get those players, you probably need European football. And that's where Casey's going to have to be good. And she's probably done well in getting Lauren James because she could become that player. She's not yet because she is so young, but I think she can be. But again, you know, you have to, I think for Casey now, it's important to find the best young players in the transfer window. The ones that maybe are not ready for the top three, but could become a superstar for Man United. And that's the big thing. That's the big thing now.
That's what I see. Sorry, Deb, I don't want to, but I see her doing it her way. Not the way you've just said. Not that I'm saying we shouldn't get a Miedemar and all this, but I see her, like you say, Lauren will be that player. And I can say that hand on my heart. If she believes in herself, she'll be that player. And I think that's the way she's going to do it. Like you said, Millie, they played fourth or fifth. But in a lot of fans' opinion, she's our best defender. And that's with Abby Mack and Amy, you know, being there. Millie Turner's our best defender, and I think that's what we're going to see. Maybe people stepping up that level, because to be fair, a lot of them did from the Championship to where they are now. And I think when you look at like Lauren, when she came on for City in the FA Cup, she changed the game. So that's what I see potentially. But Deb, I don't know if you want to.
No, I know we've got a lot to get through, so I was actually going to move on to one of your favourite subjects, Nat, and that's Lone FC.
Well, yeah.
You want to jump in there, Nat?
Lone FC, I talk about strikers, Ebony. What do you think when she came in? And then when we started having you started having fans come to Sheffield.
Yeah, I mean, when Ebony came in, like, it was quite exciting because with Nom and Fran, it was a little bit different because they'd never really played first-team football, not just at United, but even before that. Fran was in, I think, Man City's youth team and Nom was in Liverpool's youth team, so I didn't really know a lot about them. Whereas Ebony had been at Aston Villa in the Championship and she scored a lot of goals. I think she must have only been like 16, and, you know, there was a lot of top clubs after her. So you knew there was hype around her. So when she came in, you're thinking, wow, you know, you've got like a potential superstar for a few months. And I'll be honest, it was weird because like she was great. Like I think she scored 8 goals in 9 games or something, but there were so many games where she scored 1, but she could have scored 3 or 4, and like her hesitation in front of goal was incredible. And I think it was a player that needed game time. She needed confidence, and probably just towards the end that was coming, and then the season ended, unfortunately. But at that time, I saw a player that I thought could play for Man United in the future, but I didn't think she was ready for it then. And when she went to Bristol, I'll be honest, I was a little bit surprised. I thought the WSL, you know, you don't get many chances in the WSL, and Ebony sometimes needed 4 or 5 chances to score for us. And I thought at Bristol, you might get 4 or 5 chances in a month. But I think, you know, credit to her because she's done so well. Like, she scored more goals than I thought she would. And I understand why. I don't know whether it was her decision or Casey's decision, but I can understand why it happened because I think United needed someone proven. Look, in retrospect, seeing how Ebony's done, maybe she'd have had a fantastic year for Man United. But I thought she was a little way off that standard at the time. She's definitely got it in her. But again, I think she's still a teenager. So she's got so much more to give, and be interested to see how it goes this season, obviously with her extending at Bristol, and hopefully she does well and Bristol do well. But yeah, it was it was great for us to have her, and I think it helped her. You know, I don't think she would have got that Bristol move without that loan spell, because you get forgotten about very quickly. And, you know, she'd not played for United. She'd been injured. I don't think she'd played a single minute. So it was great for her. It was great for us. And yeah, she's proved me wrong, because I knew the talent was there and I knew we were going to see it one day, but I didn't actually think we'd see it quite so quick. And, you know, she's a really nice person as well. So I'm delighted she's doing so well. And obviously Norm's with us permanently and has not missed a minute, and she's been fantastic, and she's one of the bubbliest characters you could have. And I'm hoping similar for Fran, you know, whether it's at United or somewhere else. Obviously, she's had it difficult this year with getting injured right at the start of the season. So, but, you know, again, she was great when she came in. You know, for someone who hadn't played many games, she took to it like a duck to water. And yeah, hopefully she can get some game time somewhere soon.
How did the arrangement come about then that that Sheffield United took Manchester United's loan players?
I don't think there's ever been an official arrangement. I think it's just, it works. In, you know, United, I think Casey obviously likes loaning sort of the younger players out to get game time. And I think probably Molly was the oldest player we've taken, and even Molly's only, I think, 22, 23. So I think the rest have all been teenagers. And it works, you know, part-time teams. It means Casey gets to keep them most of the week, and we get them on at set times. If obviously she loaned them to a full-time club, they'd go to the full-time club every day, and Casey would never see them. So I think that was the biggest thing. I think obviously geographically, there's not many northern teams. Obviously now Blackburn are in, but that first season, if United were going to loan to a northern team, it had to be us. You know, Durham's another 2.5 hours away up north. Aston Villa and Leicester are another hour away down south. So it wouldn't have been feasible, I don't think, for them to go anywhere else. And I think the extra addition to that is that Carla and Casey have a very good relationship. They've known each other a long time. They played together. And I think it's continued because we showed, obviously, we could develop players. We developed Fran. We developed Norm. We developed Ebony into a position where she could go and get a full-time contract. And obviously, I know Palms is still a bit of a sore point with Nat, but I think, you know, we showed we could develop her. You know, she came in 6 goals, 4 assists in 5 months. And obviously, I'm sure Palms will get a full-time offer somewhere. I don't know where it's going to be, but again, you think, would she have got that? You know, she just sat on a bench at Man United all season. So I think the biggest shame for us was Molly and Rambo, actually, because, you know, we were so excited about them coming in. We needed a goalkeeper, but I think you couldn't help be excited about Molly because we saw how many goals she scored in the Championship last season from midfield, and you think, wow, like, if she can even get close to that. She came in, first 2 starts, she scored in both of them, and you think, I think we had 6 games left, and you were thinking like she could get near to double figures, like she could be a game changer for us. And unfortunately, she never played again, which was a massive shame with the way the season ended. But it's been great, like, and it's exciting for us to have players from Man United because you know they're always going to be good, and obviously it's it's got us a few new fans over the last 12 months.
Well, I'll talk about the fans in a minute, and we'll definitely go on to it. But definitely disappointment in Ramsey. I think it would have been good to have got minutes. I think that's what Lone FC is good for. I know you had Molly, but it is good for that development of the kids. And, you know, obviously then what's happened, Palms is gone, Ebony's gone. What do you think the reason, and I saw why she did it, and even say even with Palms, you can sort of see why, but then you say you need that player. But then you're saying there's no money to buy that player. But then for me, if you're going to talk striker who can change the game, who can have one chance. Ebony came on for Bristol versus Birmingham. Bang, got the goal 1-0. She, for me, I like Jane. I want Jane to do well, but she, for me, is that striker. And, you know, what it is. Why do you think I think Ramsey's going to say because she signed the contract then went out, so she's locked down. But why do you think Palms, Ebbs didn't stay?
I think it's part of how quickly United are growing. You know, like I said earlier, you built a team okay, I'm not going to be disrespectful and say you built a team just to win the championship, because you had England internationals like Alex and Shiv, but players like Palms and players like Ebony that could play in the championship, maybe they can go into the WSL, but they're still so young. And United are obviously trying to get into the Champions League, and they're trying to get, challenge the top three. And you also need those big players. Like I said, you look at Chelsea's team, there's not that many youngsters, they're all senior, first team, top class international players. Same with Arsenal, Man City, obviously have a bit more of a record for using young players, but even in their first 11 now, you got Lauren Hemp, but there's a lot of experience still in that team. And I think it's just part of it as United grow. And obviously Jackie came in and Hayley came in, and if another midfielder comes in, it just pushes players further down. And unfortunately, the game time for certain players comes less and less. Obviously, even in the first season, Ebony, they couldn't even really get a game in the championship because everyone else was doing so well. And I think it was a shame for Palms, because I would have liked to have seen what game time she might have ended up with if the season had obviously carried on to the end. But, Molly is a great example. Molly was one of your best players in the championship. She scored 13, 14 goals, something like that from midfield, and then she didn't play a minute in the WSL because you've got Jackie, you've got Hayley, you've got Katie Zellim, you've got Ella Toon. You put Palms and Molly back in there, that's 6 good midfielders for 3 positions, so there's always going to be 3 that don't play. And you recruit further, it pushes someone else. You buy someone this summer, it pushes Ella Toon further down. You buy a right back, it pushes Martha or Kirsty further down. You buy a left back, it pushes Lotta further down. If you buy a centre back, it pushes Millie or Abby out. And that's just how football works. It's natural. And I think Ebony probably looked at Jane Ross coming in and Lauren James's position and thought, well, am I going to play? That it's not going to benefit me. I need to play football. I'm young. And I think I didn't blame her for taking the Bristol offer. And it's the same for Palms. She will look at it and say, am I going to play at United next season? And if not, it's not going to help me. I could go to West Ham or Tottenham or Reading or someone, wherever she ends up, and play every week, and that's it. And as United grow stronger, it'll keep happening. More players will end up leaving because it's just natural growth, and it happens at every club. Unfortunately, players will just get pushed down the pecking order, and that's that. And it will happen with more players as United keep buying and keep improving, and there'll be more players that say, well, my time here is done. And that's just football.
I think we've touched on the questions we had. Nat, did you want to come in on something else before we move on to some of the
I definitely want to come in on our perception, though, in women's football. Not just for the start when we were in the championship. I think not a lot of people, probably, unless you were there, like you said, you saw us on Wednesday night, not a lot of people knew who the Barmy Army were, probably. It's only since getting the FA player, so everyone can watch it around the world. And then, like you say, playing teams like Arsenal, City, Liverpool, and obviously there was a lot of hype, I think, manufactured. Some of it was, but some of it exaggerated, hyped. People use words like hooligans and this and we're sitting here having a civilized conversation, and then you see me, when I come down for Lowen FC, and you see other people, and then we bought about 2 cars full for Aston Villa, and all we're doing is supporting the girls. Then when you see people saying these things, what's your thoughts?
I think there is a big difference between some of the Man United fans and the rest of the women's football fans, because you guys have come across from the men's game and you are very passionate about the singing and the chanting and even booing and things like that, which are just commonplace in the men's game. And again, I think me and you spoke about this, Nat, last week a lot in terms of the booing and things like that are just commonplace in men's football. It just happens. And in women's football, it never really has. And it was a culture shock for a lot of people. I think social media probably emphasizes it like it does everything, because you have got your sensible fans. You can sit down, have a discussion. You've got other fans that, you know, come out with opinions, and it's the same with certainly the top clubs. I think all the top clubs have their fans. Arsenal do, certainly on social media, of people that say things and you just think, come on, you don't really mean that, or you don't really think that. And I sort of remember to the end of last season, there was like some sensible United fans like yourself that were having the discussion about saying, oh yeah, you know, we'll come, you know, 5th, 6th next season, whatever, we'll be happy with that. And I remember seeing some saying like, you know, we'd beat everyone, and, you know, because like Jess Siggs was the top scorer, she was going to be the top scorer in the WSL. And I remember saying to people like, I remember the conversation, like saying Jess has like barely played WSL, like don't expect miracles from her. And I don't know how many goals she scored, but obviously she's not been sort of one of the more regular goal scorers for United. And that was like not a criticism, it was just obvious because she'd not really played WSL before. And I think it's those kind of fans at the top clubs that you have kind of a struggle with, the ones that are just sort of so blinded by their bias and their love for the club. But I think that is social media. You accept that. In terms of the games, I've never had an issue. Like I like listening to the chanting and the cheering and the booing. It's never personally been for me, men or women. I've never booed at a men's game. That's just my personal opinion. I think in women's football, it is going to take a lot of people to get used to it, but there's nothing really wrong with it. And yeah, like our girls love having you guys down at the Pro Act. I think you know Nat Wardy is very old-fashioned, played in the lower leagues a lot where there weren't many fans, and the ones that were very passionate. And Wardy can't get enough of it. Like Wardy loves the atmosphere, and everybody's different, but I think the lower down you go, I think in the Championship where teams don't have as many fans, I think actually people probably enjoy it even more so because they're probably more grateful for it. And I think, you know, it is quite fun. We do have one or two, like we've had, I think you know Nat, we have a guy at the Pro Act and who does come to some away games that sings throughout the whole match, which is quite funny because again, it takes a lot of getting used to. So I've never had a problem. I think at games, never had a problem. On social media, it is what it is. You know, I think the top clubs with fans coming from the men's game, I think you've always got a handful that probably go OTT, I think, to be polite.
It's not just the singing though, it's the banter, isn't it? And I think that's what people have taken displeasure to. You know, got more flags than you've got fans. It's just we come to Sheffield and say it, you know, but it's just a bit.
But that's because it's never happened. Like people just go to games. They go to games. They go with their mates. They watch and they go home. And like, there's never been that sort of, you know, other fan. They just mingle. Like they just all get together. It doesn't matter who you support. You know, they stand together. They drink together. They're not used to having fans coming in saying, well, this is where we stand. This is our territory. This is where we put our flags. It's just a whole new concept because you're the first group of fans that has really done that, bar very, very small pockets at other clubs. And it's just a culture thing. And I've said this before, and I'll say it probably for years to come, that the culture of the men's game to the women's game is night and day. It is so different, and it will change and it will progressively change. But you guys kind of came steaming in with the culture from the men's game. And there are a lot of fans in women's football that I think people get surprised. They don't actually support their men's team. You know, they just support the women. And some people even support different women's teams to who they support in the men's game because of personal attachment or because of people they've met or because of their mates that they see at the games. And it's just a different world. And I think you guys have probably realised that at various points, that it is completely a different attitude, a different atmosphere. It's very family orientated. And whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that's just the way it's always been. And people are resistant to change. You know, that's human nature. People are resistant to change. And I think we'll have this argument and this discussion probably for many years to come still.
Absolutely. Nat, anything you want to add to that before we move on to Ian's questions?
No, I'm happy.
Good? Right, I'm really aware, Rich, that we've taken up a huge chunk of your time already. So we've got a few questions that Ian sent in. So if we can race through them as quickly as possible. which I'm sure he'll be delighted about. But we'll start with the first one. A number of players play in both Europe and also other leagues, so maybe in America or Australia. It's a two-part question. One, why does that happen? And also, if the European team holds their registration, what is the advantage to the European team, bearing in mind that the player could come back injured or fatigued?
The first part's pretty easy, and that is because the seasons are different. In America, it's a summer league, so they play, I think ordinarily they would play from April sort of through to October, and then the players have got nothing to do, and it's just so handily that particularly the Australian league runs from about November to March, so a lot of them just go from America straight across to Australia and then back again. You don't get that many coming to Europe, just because if they did, they'd be here till June, and then they'd miss sort of the first 2-3 months of the NWSL, and I don't think many clubs are going to be happy about that. So you don't get too many coming to Europe. I think you might see a lot this year because obviously the NWSL is essentially going to be over in a month, and then they're not going to have any football until next year. So I think you might see more players coming on loan. In terms of the registration in America, it's really complicated in terms of who actually owns your rights. So players can kind of almost do what they want in a way, and the clubs will still retain their rights wherever they're playing to say, well, when you're done, you come back to us. You don't go somewhere else. You will come back to us. In Europe, I think most clubs know that it's probably best, you look at Alana Cook, who's just gone from PSG to OL Reign for the NWSL Cup. It's essentially a 1-month loan, and, it gets Cook game time. She's young. She doesn't play every week. She's going to play in the NWSL, and she'll come back match fit for the Champions League. Yeah, there's a risk of injury, but there's a risk of injury every time you go out on the pitch, whether it's PSG or an NWSL team. I think teams would rather get their players match fit and some much needed game time, to be honest. So I don't think the injury thing is too much of a worry because, you can get injured whenever.
Okay, thanks.
He said the second one, he's said there was a Daily Telegraph article. I noticed how they used our pictures with the flags. Saturday, 3:00. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm all for it. I mean, I've never been a massive fan of the blackout anyway, even in the men's game. I think it's a bit old-fashioned now. I understand why it's there. It's to stop people just sitting at home and to actually encourage people to go to games. But, women's football attendances are way off that anyway. So, yeah, I think if there's any way of exposing women's football more and putting it on TV at a time where you can't sit down and watch Man United's men's team or Man City's men's team or Arsenal's men's team, yeah, put it on. I no idea why there's a blackout in women's football. I really don't. I think it's just not needed. There's absolutely no need for it. So yeah, if they can get women's football on 3 p.m. on a Saturday, do it.
Do you not think that it may affect attendances in the ground because there is so much, like you said, people don't usually support the same team, so it could be someone supports a non-league whatever team in the men's game, and that's when they play, and then so you lose half your attendance. Do you think it will affect that way?
I mean, it might, but I think you have to be sensible. Obviously, like give certain, don't put the same team on every week, obviously, and look, there's always going to be a clash. There's only so many days in the week to get men's and women's football on, and obviously it's always 9 times out of 10 going to be at a weekend. You can't avoid it. We have the same discussions every season. A Man United women's game clashes with the men's game, or Man City clashes with the men, and it's so hard. Like, there's only so many slots you can put football in, and there are a lot of match-going fans in women's football, and I hope they can all still go, and I never want them not to. But the reality is TV around the world now is massive, and if you can put a game on to 150 different countries, or millions of people just in your own country, it's going to grow the attention, because at the end of the day, in a stadium, there'll be 1,000 people, and it's great, and I want those people to enjoy it, and that is really important. But if you can push your league out and your players and your product to millions and millions and millions of people and sponsors, watching around the world, people who maybe have never seen a game, that's how you're going to get bigger attendances in the future.
Bit of a bugbear of ours. Do you think the FA is doing enough to raise the standards of refereeing?
I think they always need to do more. I do know they are trying to. We had a conversation with Kelly Simmons at a media day last summer. I can't remember off the top of my head what was said, but I do remember there being quite a good plan in place for improving refereeing. It needs to improve. There are some very good women's football referees, and particularly the female referees actually are very good, but a lot of the male referees that come across, you only have to be a certain level because of the professionalism of the league. And a lot of them come across who are like 6th, 7th tier, referees in the men's game. And I think now it's a full-time league and a professional league. You need professional referees and full-time referees. And that's just part of the game growing. Like, the game has grown so fast, and you could argue the FA have made it grow too fast, and they weren't potentially prepared for everything around it, like the referees. The game has sort of gone from here to, top level in 2 years, and the refereeing has probably stayed at the same level. And it all takes time, and it's going to take time, but it needs to happen, definitely. We don't have any FIFA referees. We didn't have anyone at the World Cup. And yeah, it needs to be. And obviously, I know a lot of people scoffed at, obviously, the stats that came out saying something like 96% of the chances, the decisions were correct. And
Fake news.
Yeah, I think obviously, it's probably not a million miles from the truth, because there's so many the little decisions a game that you don't even notice that they give. If they give a throw in or they give a corner or something, but it is the big decisions that you see and they get remembered, and they're the ones that have to change. Obviously the one that stands out, of course, is the one against Reading for you guys, where was it Katie Zellum got smacked in the face? Decisions like that can't happen. They just cannot happen. And obviously bad decisions happen in the men's game too. And we saw one last week, first Premier League game back, where Sheffield United got robbed of a goal because the goal line technology failed, and it happens. But yeah, that decision was probably the most embarrassing I've seen in women's football. But I do also remember, a few years ago, I think it was Donny Bells versus Sheffield FC. The referee gave a penalty for handball, I think, by a Sheffield FC player, and it was actually a Donny Bells player that handballed it. So this has been going on for years, and it needs to improve, and I think it will. But like everything in women's football, less money, less resources, it just takes more time, and unfortunately that's just part of the problem. But I think we'll get there, but it needs to be accelerated. I think they are doing enough. I think there's a plan in place, but they need to get on with it.
And this question sort of goes back to the other one that Ian did ask before the referee one, who we don't mind, Deb, but you're talking about in a stadium there's potentially 1,000 people, but what we've seen this year is a lot of games going into the men's stadium. And then obviously you see a lot more, you're seeing 35,000, you're seeing all this. Do you think that's the way that we should go? Because obviously then you see them come back and it's not as many, or it's the same attendance. Do you think, you're talking about growing it via telly? Do you not think that maybe it should be grown on the ground, grow it up? What's your view on that thought and the stadiums?
I think you can do both, and I think you need to do both. I think, like I said before, I don't want people to ever feel like they can't go to games anymore, or they're not appreciated at games anymore. But like I said, the reality of TV now and Sky and, Netflix and Amazon, Amazon obviously coming into football, it just puts it out to hundreds of millions of people. And you want hundreds of millions to watch women's football, because we're far from that at the minute. But yeah, I think clubs, and again, it's part of the game growing. The clubs are growing quick, and probably everything around it's not growing. The marketing side, a lot of clubs probably still only have 1 or 2 marketing people. On the men's side, you probably, some of the big clubs, you've probably got hundreds, and you can only do so much if you're part-time, or, you've got 1 or 2 people coming up with a marketing plan for how you get more fans into the game. And they're the things, again, that probably are not growing as quick as the game itself is. And, I use us as an example at Sheffield United. We put a big marketing plan together for the games we had against Aston Villa and Man City, because they were back-to-back within the space of 4 days. One was a big promotion clash. One was obviously Man City coming down in the Conti Cup. And we did a lot more for that than we usually would, because we had a lot of people helping us from the men's side. Usually it's me and, one or two others, if that. And we got, over 1,000 people down for both games. One was an all championship match and we got over 1,000. One was Man City, but it was on a freezing cold Wednesday night and we got 1,500. And it shows that when you put that little bit more effort in, you can get more people down. But the reality is, it's very hard to do that week in, week out, because there's some games that are not as attractive on paper, and you just don't always have the marketing available to do it. And again, they're things that will change, and it's going to take years for clubs to start investing in all the right areas. And I hope the COVID situation doesn't stop that in terms of the money, but it just feels like the game has grown, but everything around it, whether it's refereeing, whether it's marketing, whether it's attendances, it's just not growing as quick as the game itself.
So thinking about the structure of the game you talked about there, but moving on to something that people treat a bit like Marmite, the Conti Cup. The question that Ian's got, he wants to make the point, he's a fan of the Conti Cup. He doesn't want to get rid of it the way some people do. But his thinking is that, are the championship teams at a disadvantage if they have to travel away to a Super League team midweek, when perhaps as a part-time team, some of them may have been working during the day, they've then got the travel? Would it make more sense, would it be more beneficial and more, would it just be fairer if the championship teams were always at home midweek and it was the Super League teams that had to travel?
Yeah, it would, and I think that has been discussed, to have WSL, especially. I don't think it was for weekends necessarily, but for midweek games, it had definitely been discussed. And yeah, we had that. I remember sitting in a press conference with Jade Pennock. We put her up for the media after the Man City game, and even though we were at home, she'd come straight from work, and she basically said she'd had a banana. And you got to play a 90-minute match against a full-time Man City team that had probably, had an easy day, done a bit of gym, had a meal, and we had players turning up, having a bit of fruit before the match. So, and last year when we went over there, we went on a Wednesday night and we had players turning up from work like 15 minutes before the match. So, yeah, it's I like the Conti Cup, and it was good to us this season. I like having more games, and I'd miss it if it wasn't there, because it is a big chunk of matches. If you lose it, there's a lot of group games, and I think it certainly has a place. But yeah, I think if you're having championship teams travelling on a Tuesday or Wednesday night when you've got players that are working until 5-6 o'clock, it's crazy. So I think next season, I think I like the mixed up groups, and I like seeing the small teams play the big teams. And like I said, it was great for us this season in terms of winning the group. So I hope it stays, but I think it definitely, it just needs those few tweaks to, you're not fixing it, you're almost saying, look, you're better, so you have to play away from home. But I think the reality of part-time football is that is just how it should be. And I hope that does come in this season.
Yeah, I remember, I think Casey even mentioned it, so probably it has been talked about. Just the last one from us, and it's going to be a mix of me, a bit, maybe some over Twitter, but, it's just Andy. And you've been talking a lot about what United are going to do. So I want to know where you think, and this is Ian saying this, our weaknesses are, where do you think they're going to strengthen? There's talk of, you said it even at the start, a right back. United don't have attacking fullbacks. There's talk about a battle coming in. But if you want to name anyone, if you know of anything, let our fans know, exclusives, but just generally positions if you want as well.
Yeah, I've heard a lot, obviously, on social media about the two Spanish girls. I think Ona, it sounds like it's very close. No one's kind of committing to saying it's done, but the reality is, from what I've heard, it is all but done, bar just signing the paperwork. And obviously she has to actually travel to Manchester, and hopefully that can happen soon. But obviously in the current situation, you've got to be careful about if and when people can travel. So I think everything might get done remotely. I think with Eva, it sounds a little bit more complicated. I think it sounds like she would like to stay in Spain, but the reality is that might not be a possibility with this sort of ridiculous training fee rule. I think fullback is an area United need to improve. I think last year they almost didn't have fullbacks in a way. Obviously, Kirsty's there, but Amy's not really a fullback by trade, and Martha was kind of in and out. And I think they lost a lot. And I think, again, you look at the top teams, they've got fullbacks that will just bomb forward all day long. And I don't think you saw that enough from United. I think Lotte has that in her, but obviously she needs to adapt and she needs more game time. And it still remains to be seen whether she's got that quality to play for United. So if Ona comes in, I'm not going to pretend I've seen a lot of her, but she's obviously very highly rated in Spain. There has been a mention of Lucy Staniforth, and I've mentioned this to Nat, but it's very up in the air. I mean, every different person you ask, someone says Man City, someone says Man United, someone says Everton. And I think that's happening with a lot of players at the minute because there's just so much going on. There's so many players out of contract that actually everything's very muddled. It would make a lot of sense, obviously, with Palms having gone, and I still imagine, I know it hasn't been announced, but I'd imagine Molly will go to add another body in the midfield. And she's a bit chalk and cheese, is Lucy, but, you know, she's a very good player. And if you are struggling to break a team down, you know, she can smash one in from 30 yards, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I think maybe a right winger, but Ona can play there, but obviously she can't play there two positions at the same time. So I don't know whether they'd look to bring someone in. I think Kirsty needs a bit more development time to get to that level, and Jess is probably more at her peak, but again, quality-wise, does she have enough going forward? So I think certainly you look down the wings, both the wings and the fullback positions, and I think for me, there's only Leah with that real outright quality. I think the spine is good. I think Millie and Abby is a solid partnership. I think maybe moving forward in the years to come, you'd look to possibly put a real top-class defender alongside either one of them, rather than keep them as a pair. But the midfield's great. I love Hayley Ladd. I think she's fantastic. Jackie, I think there's still more to come. And like I said, with Katie there, it's strong. Ella's a good player. And if Lucy comes in, then that's a very strong area. Be interesting to see if she does stick with Jane and if they can get more out of Jane this year. If not, then I certainly think another striker will have to be a thing moving forward. If Eva does come in, I think she can play there. So it's interesting. I'm sure they'll recruit because there are players that have gone out, and hopefully there'll be one or two coming to a certain championship club on loan soon. I don't know who. Genuinely, I do not know who. Carla tells me absolutely nothing until I absolutely need to know. So, but yeah, it's a big year. Every year is going to be big for United because it's moving so quick. But I think I would trust Casey to get it right more times than she'll get it wrong.
But let me say, the devs are very important, and it's really, that's what United is. I don't want to say to Casey what to do, but that is the base for me. Manchester. Let's build it from there.
Now, anything else you want to add?
That's it. Manchester.
Good. Rich, thank you so much for joining us for this, and thank you to anybody who sent in questions. Hopefully, we covered everything that was asked, and yeah, just thank you so much. I think we've taken a huge chunk of your time, but it's been great, and we've really appreciated it. And maybe we'll do it all again when football's back and there's actually games to talk about or players, and we can talk about something real as opposed to hopes, dreams, and ambitions. But yeah, thanks very much, Nat. Thank you as ever, Rich. It has been a pleasure. Keep well, and hopefully we'll all be together again at a game sometime. Thanks very much, everyone.